You ever heard the name Scott La Rock? Most people haven't. But without him, hip-hop wouldn't sound the same, and the game wouldn't have known death so soon. This wasn't just another brother with a beat machine. This was a man who came from the Bronx, the birthplace of hip-hop, but thought like a Wall Street executive. He had a degree in business, a clean suit, a calm voice. He knew publishing, promotion, marketing, long before rappers learned to own their names. He believed hip-hop wasn't just sound. It was structure. It was survival. And yet, the same system he tried to change took his life. Because in 1987, before the platinum chains, before the Bentleys, there was blood on the pavement. They said it was over a small argument, a misunderstanding on the streets. But people close to him whispered something else. That Scott La Rock was assassinated. That his death wasn't random, it was a warning to any young black man who dared to be smarter than the system. He wasn't just the first DJ to die. He was the first dreamer buried under hip-hop's fame. So tonight, we go back to the Bronx, to the blocks where turntables hummed and bullets answered back. This is where hip-hop met its first tragedy. This is where Scott La Rock's story begins. Before the music, before the fame, there was just a boy named Scott Sterling, born and raised in the Bronx, the rough cradle of hip-hop. The buildings were cracked, the heat pipes screamed in the winter, and every night the sirens sang louder than the streetlights. His father left when he was 4. His mother, a quiet warrior, worked double shifts and still came home with enough love to make it feel like daylight inside that one-bedroom apartment. Scott learned early that life didn't owe him anything. He also learned that kindness wasn't weakness. Even when his stomach was empty, he'd share what little food he had with other kids in the neighborhood. There were nights he would walk blocks just to bring someone a sandwich. That was who he was, the kind of soul that wanted to fix things the world didn't bother to see. By 12, the Bronx was changing. The gangs were losing ground to something new, a sound born from the asphalt. And one night, in a park on Sedgwick Avenue, Scott saw DJ Kool Herc perform. Extension cords ran from a lamppost, connecting the beat to the street. The bass rattled through his chest, and he watched the crowd kids who'd been fighting just days before move together under one rhythm. It wasn't just a party. It was peace. That moment carved itself into him. He went home obsessed. He wanted to understand that power, the power to make people forget pain for 3 minutes at a time. His grandfather, seeing the fire in him, saved up to buy 2 turntables. No one knew it then, but that gift changed hip-hop. Every afternoon after school, Scott would spin old records, trying to imitate the legends. He'd listen to the way one drum beat blended into another. He called himself Scott La Rock, taking the name from Coke La Rock, the first MC, the voice of the streets before contracts and cameras. To Scott, the name wasn't about fame. It was about respect for the foundation, for the movement, for the truth. But while he lived for music, his mother wanted safety. She thought sports could save him, and for a while, basketball did. Scott grew tall, 6'3" and quick. He captained his high school team, gliding across cracked gym floors with the same rhythm he used behind turntables. Basketball became his ticket out. When Castleton State College in Vermont offered him a full scholarship, he took it. He left the Bronx's noise for snow-covered silence. He was one of the few black students on campus, but instead of folding into the background, he brought the Bronx with him. He started DJing for the college radio station, playing hip-hop for white students who'd never heard it before. On weekends, he packed a small bar called Dugan's Lines of students waiting outside in the freezing air just to dance to the sound of his records. Inside, he controlled the room, hands on vinyl, eyes closed, heart open. They said he made Vermont feel like New York for the first time. But he didn't just play records. He taught the culture. He brought friends from the Bronx to paint graffiti, to breakdance, to show the world what hip-hop really meant. He wasn't trying to entertain, he was trying to educate. He was building a bridge between 2 Americas, one that struggled to be seen and one that had never looked. When graduation came, he held a degree in business administration, a handshake from professors who called him the gentleman DJ. Offers arrived a chance to play basketball overseas. But Scott had already chosen his court. He turned down the contract, packed his records, and headed home to the Bronx. Because he knew long before anyone else did that hip-hop wasn't just a sound. It was an industry waiting to be built, and he was ready to build it. When Scott came back to the Bronx, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing purpose. He could have worn a suit, worked in an office, lived comfortably. Instead, he walked straight back into the same neighborhoods the world had already written off. He got a job as a social worker at the Franklin Men's Shelter, a place filled with men who'd been forgotten. Ex-cons, addicts, teenagers fresh off the streets. Every day, he tried to keep them alive long enough to believe in something again. He carried himself differently: tie, pressed shirt, briefcase. To them, he looked like a square. But behind that clean image was the same DJ who'd once made Vermont dance. That's where he met KRS-One, a homeless, angry young poet who drew on the walls and rapped to survive. Their first conversation ended in an argument over meal tickets. Scott told him to get a job. KRS told him he didn't understand the struggle. But later, when they met again at a small studio run by Seth G from the Ultramagnetic MCs, something shifted. KRS saw that the social worker was hip. Scott saw that the homeless kid was brilliant. Two opposites, one from education, one from pain, found the same rhythm. They started recording together, first with a few friends under the name Scott La Rock and the Celebrity 3. The music was raw, conscious, full of message, but too early for radio. The label dropped them. Everyone else quit, except Scott and KRS. They renamed themselves Boogie Down Productions BDP for the Bronx they came from. It wasn't just a group, it was a declaration. Boogie Down meant survival. It meant telling the truth, even when it hurt. They performed in small clubs around New York, carrying crates of records, spitting verses about life in the projects. Scott handled the sound. KRS handled the message. Together, they were balanced mind and voice. Their big break came by accident through rejection. They played their demo for Mr. Magic, one of New York's most powerful radio DJs. He listened, paused, and told them straight up, "You're whack." Those words lit a fire. KRS went back to the studio, furious, and wrote South Bronx, a song that turned humiliation into history. The track was raw, unapologetic, and real. It shouted what every Bronx kid had been waiting to say: this is where hip-hop started. Daddy. When DJ Red Alert spun it on the radio, the crowd went wild. They demanded it again and again until the record had to be played back to back. The Bronx had its anthem. Soon after came The Bridge Is Over, a response to MC Shan's track, The Bridge. It wasn't just a diss record, it was a war cry. And it changed the sound of hip-hop forever. Then came the album Criminal Minded. Released in 1987, it was unlike anything before. The cover showed Scott and KRS posing with guns not as gangsters, but as revolutionaries. The songs mixed street wisdom with social insight. None Millimeter goes bang. Putri, Criminal Minded. It was raw, fearless, and prophetic. It told America, the streets are speaking now. Rolling Stone would later call it one of the 500 greatest albums of all time. But in that moment, all Scott cared about was proving something that hip-hop could be business, message, and movement at once. He was no longer the kid handing out sandwiches. He was the man building an empire from rhythm. In just 2 years, he went from social worker to legend. And still, he carried himself with the same calm, same briefcase, same smile. Because fame didn't change him. It only gave his purpose a microphone. By the summer of 1987, everything seemed untouchable. Criminal Minded was playing everywhere. The Bronx, Queens, Harlem, even downtown Manhattan. Scott had finally done it. He'd built something real, something clean out of chaos. He was already planning the next album, already thinking long-term publishing rights, marketing, touring. He wasn't just DJing. He was designing a blueprint for every artist that would come after. Then the phone rang. It was Demise. the youngest member of Boogie Down Productions. His voice was cracked, terrified. He told Scott he'd just been jumped, beaten, and pistol-whipped by a jealous boyfriend who thought he was talking to his girl. He was only 16, crying, bleeding, afraid. Scott didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and keys. His instinct was the same as it had always been. Help first, talk later. He called up their bodyguard, Daryl Robocop, a giant of a man, and a few others. They got in a Jeep Wrangler and drove through the night toward the projects, the streetlights flashing across the windshield like warning signs. KRS-One stayed behind. He'd later say he didn't want to be part of any confrontation, but Scott wasn't going for war. He was going for peace. When they pulled up, the block was alive, with noise, kids shouting, radios blaring, windows glowing in the summer heat. Scott stepped out first. He found the man who'd hurt Demise. Voices rose, hands moved, but in the end they shook. Beef squashed it, just like that. But fate wasn't finished. Robocop got into an argument with another man nearby. Words turned sharp, shoulders collided. Then the air broke. Gunshots. From the bushes. From the rooftops. From the dark corners that never sleep. Everyone dove for cover. Scott jumped back into the passenger seat as Robocop slammed the gas pedal. Bullets cut through the night. Glass shattered. Tires screamed. 5 people in the Jeep. Only 2 bullets hit. Both found Scott, one in the neck, one in the head. For a few seconds, no one realized it. He was still sitting upright, eyes wide, asking, "Why is the music so loud?" Then his head slumped forward. Blood ran down his collar. Demise screamed his name until his voice broke. They raced to the hospital. The doctors worked for hours, but there are things even rhythm can't revive. Scott LaRock was pronounced brain dead, 25 years old. The first casualty in the game of hip-hop. News spread fast. Clubs went silent that night. Red Alert cried on air. KRS-One stood outside the hospital, unable to walk in. He said he didn't want to remember his friend like that, not on a hospital bed, not with the wires and machines. The police arrested 2 men, Corey Bain and Kendall Newland, but with no witnesses willing to testify, both walked free. The case went cold. Months later, whispers started that Scott's death wasn't random, that B-Boy Records, the label they were trying to leave, had paid for it. Scott had been negotiating with Warner Brothers for a new deal that gave them full publishing rights. Too smart, too clean, too independent. In an industry that fed on control, that made him dangerous. Some say it was a stray bullet. Others swear it was a sniper. But every version ends the same, with a young man who believed in peace lying still, his music echoing through hospital walls. The night Scott LaRock died, hip-hop lost its innocence, and the silence that followed was the sound of something breaking forever. The news of Scott LaRock's death hit New York like an aftershock. For the first time, hip-hop, that voice of the streets, that escape from pain, had lost one of its own to the same violence it tried to rise above. Radio DJs spoke his name with disbelief. Red Alert broke down live on air. Fans left candles on Bronx sidewalks next to posters that said simply, "Rest in Beats." The industry didn't know what to do with grief. There was no rule book for mourning a rapper then. No hashtags, no tributes, no press releases. Just silence. A heavy one. Because this wasn't a gang member or a hustler. This was a college graduate, a man with a degree and a mission. If someone like him could die in the crossfire, what did that mean for everyone else? In the weeks that followed, KRS-One couldn't sleep. He replayed the night again and again, the call, the Jeep, the sirens. The guilt became unbearable. Out of that pain came purpose. He wrote songs that sounded less like brags and more like prayers. He told anyone who would listen that hip-hop had to grow up, had to stop bleeding itself dry. That's how the Stop the Violence movement was born. Not as a slogan, but as a scream. KRS-One gathered the biggest voices of the time: Public Enemy, MC Lyte, Doug E. Fresh, Heavy D, Kool Moe Dee, and turned grief into unity. Their anthem, Self-Destruction, hit #1 on Billboard's rap chart. Every dollar went to the National Urban League to fund peace programs in black neighborhoods. For the first time, the world saw hip-hop not as noise, but as a movement with a conscience. In the media, Scott became a symbol. Magazines called him the teacher before the teacher. Newspapers wrote about how he tried to stop violence and died because of it. To older Americans, he was proof that hip-hop carried both danger and dignity. To the younger generation, he became a quiet legend, the man who died so the culture could evolve. Years later, cities around the world would see hip-hop become an institution. Grammy stages, museums, college courses. But long before the lights and trophies, there was a man in a tie and a smile, spinning records at a homeless shelter, believing this music could save lives. And in that belief, America saw something rare, a reflection of itself. Flawed, hopeful, and still fighting for redemption. When the gunfire stopped, hip-hop lost more than a man. It lost its reflection, the part of itself that believed it could rise without violence. In the months after his death, KRS-One carried that silence like a wound. He stopped talking about money, fame, records. Every interview, every verse, somehow circled back to Scott. He said, "Half our crew is in the spirit world now. The other half is here. We can't lose." Maybe that was how he made peace, by believing the dead could still make music. But not everyone healed. Demise, still barely a man himself, spent years haunted by guilt. He thought every step he took had led to Scott's grave. For 25 years, he didn't speak to KRS-One. When they finally did, it wasn't through anger, it was through tears. Two survivors trying to understand a storm that never made sense. Then there was Scott LaRock Jr., just 9 months old when his father died. He grew up hearing stories about the legend, the college kid who became a hero. The peacemaker who died for calm, but not the father who should have tucked him in. He spent his youth fighting the streets that took his father, serving time, carrying bitterness. Years later, he would say on camera, "KRS-One never did anything for me." A sentence heavy enough to echo across decades of silence. Yet, even in pain, legacy found its way home. In 2017, the Bronx renamed a boulevard, Scott LaRock Boulevard, right on Jerome Avenue, where his journey began. The city that once buried him under gunfire now lifted his name in steel. Every car that drives past carries a piece of his unfinished dream, because what Scott stood for never died. He believed that knowledge could save lives, that hip-hop could be education, not destruction. That being smart was a kind of rebellion. The tragedy of Scott LaRock wasn't just his death, it was how clearly he saw the future, and how quickly the world stole it from him. But even now, every time a DJ drops a beat with purpose, every time a young rapper picks truth over violence, a little of Scott spins again. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause. To anyone who's ever tried to bring peace into chaos, this one's for you. And to the Bronx boy who believed music could save the broken, we still hear you.